Hello and welcome to Group I Hope I Get an A's second talk show. I'm Mr. McKernan. Here with me I have Mr. Smith, Mr. Vidal, Ms. Caldwell, Mr. Pohl, and Ms. Carmelo. Let's begin.
So the first thing we want to do is we want to address the feedback on our last talk show. And the big question posed was, I'll read it. It says here, Mr. McKernan tries to put a bow on the whole discussion, saying something like, so we can say that experience leads to knowledge. Then Mr. Pohl comes back with an amendment, yes, to an extent. Everyone seems to agree, but what does this mean? To what extent?
Well, just to clarify what we meant by that is you can gain a lot of knowledge from experience, but to an extent, everyone already has some knowledge, and we kind of related this to common sense. And our example was, you don't need to jump out a window to realize that's a bad idea. It's just something you can observe or you can see because of the height and things like that. So that is what we meant by you gaining knowledge through experience to an extent.
All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a discussion or an argument around the question of what came first, society or language. So the three teams are split up, three of us and then three of them, and we are the team that's arguing for society had to have came first, and they're going to argue that language came first. So, first argument.
With Paul first.
Oh, okay. In blog post number 8 by Ms. Stevick, she said that the biggest point of this reading was how society was founded when a person decided to say, this is mine, and that she said there were many factors that went into forming society, but the main one was like that language saying, like, this is mine, this is, like, just establishing those boundaries.
Right. And to go off of that, Rousseau points out that one of the first revolutions was the establishment of property. So that is basically the saying of mine. But even if someone builds a fence and claims land, they have to let someone know other than just a physical object, like representing what is theirs. So when people come across it to explore this, they have to be able to say, this is mine, you can't be here, or ask permission to be able to establish that sense of possession. But we needed language to develop that type of communication.
And even within that, when he said people started to come together and hunted, gathered food, there would need to be a communication to certain jobs which people would need to do, and in order to take food back to their homes and establish this is mine or what belongs to them, personal beings.
I'll go ahead. For our argument towards society becoming first, my main thought was when we read about how the savage man just had no bonds of relationships with any other people and just roam around these vast forests by himself and just didn't need anyone except when he would come in contact with a woman, they would just go separate ways. And my feeling was that once these savage men started to live in the same vicinity as each other, stayed in one spot, they would eventually need to communicate somehow. So without having anyone around you, why would you need a language to communicate with other people? I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Rousseau talks about how there's a need to have a language before language can ever be formed, that no savage man would ever sit there and try and form any sort of word unless there was some purpose to it, and there's no conceivable way that would have been necessary unless there was a society in which they had things like possessions and they needed some sort of communication between groups of people, between individuals. So.
And the first thing that Rousseau said in part 2 is that the first person who, having an enclosed plot of land taken to his head saying, this is mine, it's founded true civil society. The problem is that he might have said it's mine, but without the fence going around and it's his own land. That's the first part. You need the first step of actually having that own land before you're saying it's mine.
Well, going off of that, continuing what Russo said on that part, he says that he needed to find simple enough people to believe him, and you just putting up a structure is not going to make anyone believe you just straight out. You have to communicate to them other ways that this is yours and this is why it's mine. Like,
I mean, there's a possibility of putting up a high enough structure or a structure that cannot be destroyed by anything that a simple man can't take down. So he's like, okay, I can't go there because I have no tools to get into it or go through the wall. So obviously I know I can't, it's not for me.
well, that's kind of a good point, but if you're going to go with the rest of your argument that your group presented, it sounds like to have any sort of society where people can communicate any of these things of mine, there has to be language. You can't just have society and everyone say mine, 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 because, I have this physical object, because someone's going to get the idea to band together in some way, and it's probably going to take language after these structures are built to then overthrow someone possibly that has this big structure in which you speak of.
But as you just said, the structure just came first because
But
you said they had to band up together after the structure was built to take it over.
well, that was if we just played into your scenario. But for any of these people to come together after wandering through the forest, as Mr. McKern said, on their own, they had to communicate in some way before they built anything.
And even beforehand, when Savage Man was by himself, he kind of had to have a communication within himself, or like had to have his own type of language, because he trained himself in order to set traps to get food. It says he tricked the animals 1,000 ways to surpass them, like fighting with strength and running. And he, in a way, like in the environment and nature, he would have to have his own communication in order to protect his own stuff or his own like personal items in order to survive, I think. So I feel like you would need the language and the communication first, like by yourself, in order to come together and then within one another.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
For any
Yeah.
community to come together, they
Yeah.
have to have a set structure. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. And Bruce also says that they communicated with like inarticulate cries and gestures and stuff. But I mean, that wasn't too effective. Like in saying I don't know, they set up a fence, just a couple grunts. I mean, how would someone know oh, that's theirs? I can't go over there. That's their land, not mine. I can't take that. So I think something had to have been some kind of language had to have been formed before that whole society in order to set it up.
Like something so small evolved into a big communication.
I think one big thing in this debate is just defining what is considered language, because you brought up these grunts and everything about you could grunt to someone, I guess, that this is your land, but these men were by themselves and I guess could grunt to each other, but what is defined as language? And I feel once people were I guess this is very great
What?
thinking, but when they're once you start living in the vicinity of other people's, you start understanding these grunts and more evolves off of it. But I feel you need a consistency with other people that are around you to form this language.
I would agree with that but first I would say that okay. So in the sense that when Savage Man is, setting traps, making tools, and thinking to himself oh, I'm hungry, I need food. Well, when he runs into another person, he has to communicate that, and if they can agree on, this one thing, having a certain name or sound associated with it, that's where language starts. And then once they develop that, say 2 people, they can spread that to other people, which then makes a society. So if you have 2 people agreeing on one thing, that's the start of language. You can pass it on to other people to then create a society to be able to say, this is my fence.
Yes, but I mean, maybe not. Think about how the original scenario where the man has to take property and other people have to respect it as that man's own property, and at that moment we have a society, right? So you don't need language to be able to say, this is mine, don't touch it. Like, you can't eat it, you can't take it, you can't use it because it's mine. And for other people to say, okay, that's yours. You know, it doesn't necessarily need to be a vocal thing. We talked about how, like, the first men to have property were the biggest and strongest because they could most easily and readily build a hut, you know what I mean, and mark it as, or it would be theirs not because he told people, this is mine, don't go in there, you know, like, this is my house, you can't go in there. It was his because other people saw that he settled there and figured in their own minds, without necessarily having any need yet for language, to say, well, if I try and take that, then that man is bigger and stronger than me, so he can push me out, he could kill me if he wanted to, so I can't do that yet. That's the point where they say, okay, like, that's his, this is mine, and like, that's the point of society forming, right? And he talks about how language was not formed without a need for language, and it seems that the first need for language would be, he talks about here how two more men coming together for a common cause, and that whatever these origins may be about the origins of language, it is clear that from little care taken by nature to bring men together through mutual need and to facilitate their use of speech. So men had to have had some sort of common need that they had in a society together before they had the need for speech. Like, some sort of thing that they needed to do together before they needed to communicate with each other. Which, for instance, might have been taking over the hut. If two men said, hey, we should get together because it'd be good for us to take over this hut, maybe they might both be thinking it, but there would be the need for language within a society to go and create some way of communicating those ideas with each other.
If you have that thought process of, like, saying someone's stronger than you, and if I try and take this over, they're gonna, like, fight me or hurt me and become violent. If that person already have that thought process within their brain and stuff, don't you think, like, they already have like that source of communication? Or is it different if you have communication within yourself than a communication with others?
Well, I think it's more of a natural instinct that if someone's bigger than me and stronger than me, they're gonna beat me at anything. It's just like when I see a bear or a lion out in the wild. For a savage man, he's thinking, that's bigger than me, that will eat me, so I'm gonna go the other way. So it's just a natural instinct just for him to turn around and not even bother trying to take it over.
I think I get what you're going at with that, though, how in a man's thought process, he has to have the language to think things out, like, clearly and logically. But I don't think that is necessarily true, because they talked about, like, the first words, or like the first things that meant anything were a grunt or a motion or a gesture, whatever it might be. Mostly grunts, because, like, the audible thing was, we talked about the audible thing versus the visual signs. But it would be like tree, and it would be like, that is a tree, that this grunt represents that tree. And he talks about how, like, eventually somehow it turned from, there's this one tree that's represented by this one word, but that turns into trees as a whole. These things made out of wood with leaves on them are represented by a word. And so that, I feel like that kind of like illustrates how you can have a thought process without having to have a language for things. Like, you can identify something and put a meaningless arbitrary word to it, thus giving it meaning, without necessarily having to have a language, because, like, that would be, like, you can think about things with, alright, I'm trying to say
That
this,
is language.
but you
Yeah,
can
like-
think about things without having to have a language for them. Like, if we needed a language to use to have a language, like, to create a language, then we would never have came up with any language. Does that make sense? Alright.
Yeah, if like they all use like the same grunt to like point it at a tree and they all like, grunted in the same way, wouldn't that be language? Like they're all like saying tree.
Yeah.
Like,
I would agree with you there, but like you would have to be like with us like more than one person to like make that known to multiple people that like that grunt means like a tree, like living with like other living in the vicinity of other people and like having that like common knowledge. Like I think it's like has to do with like repetition, I guess, kind of. So, but I don't know if that makes sense. But.
And also with that, everyone has to agree with that one word, that one type of means tree.
Yeah.
But if I think Uga means tree, then we all have to figure out which word we're gonna agree upon to. But with that, you still need to define language.
Here's my thing though. I feel like people can live in close vicinities and not be in a society, but if they were going to develop any sort of structure, they need language, because you can't talk or figure out how you want to, run any group of people greater than like 3 without some form of communication and how things are going to run and how people are supposed to conduct themselves. Because Rousseau was talking about how there was a
certain etiquette associated with, or like behavior associated with these property boundaries, which they didn't just come with the development of these boundaries, but once boundaries were physically put up, someone had to say like, look, this is mine, this is the boundary, honor it, yada yada yada. But before that, they had to establish something that needed language.
I agree with that point, but I was just thinking back to like when we were talking about the first person like have a property, he like, if he was just bigger and stronger, like you would just stay away from him. But, like in a society, like you said, like you would need language in a society to have it like run smoothly and everything. But you have like the biggest and the strongest were the leaders, and like you had to like the men would always seem to like go and hunt, and like the women would stay home like take care of the children. Like that you don't really necessarily need language to like carry that out, because I guess it's expected of the men were just bigger, stronger, faster, would just go out and hunt. So, like no communication could have been needed to like definitely set that up.
Well, here's the thing. I thought about something kind of like that. Like if you didn't have any language and like everyone just kind of assumed some sort of role. Say one day someone decides to wander someone else's hut because there's not really any understanding of property and like this is mine, because you can't just build something and not say anything and expect people to know it's yours. I just don't think that's how it works. You need some other form of communication. If this person wanders in there and someone else gets mad and attacks that person, well, he was ignorant to the fact, just blatantly. Because I was kind of thinking like, well, if there's a big man and a scrawny man, and the big man goes to the blueberry bush and picks blueberries, and this guy says, oh, well, I need blueberries, and he goes and picks blueberries. But that guy can't get mad at him because that's nature, that's just out there, right? That's not his blueberry bush, he's going to know. Everyone goes to the blueberry bush, or a blueberry bush, or whatever. But if this big man goes into a hut and comes out with food or something, that little guy goes, oh, well, I need food too, so I'm going to go in the hut. Well, he didn't know. Someone has to tell him, and they had to establish that. That was kind of
What if the form of telling him that he can't go in there is like the physical, like when he tries to enter, like push him out or like kill him or what? Like
I mean,
that doesn't require language to do, but that's still.
that would be after the fact. I'm arguing for the ignorance. I'm saying that because if no one said anything, and if his ignorance allows him to go do something like that, and the other person retaliates, well, it's due to the lack of communication. So you can try and argue for, something physical being there, like that someone else built, so you don't touch it. But if that concept's not around yet, like we have today, like, oh, that someone else's, don't touch it, that's not around, then can you blame anyone?
Now, okay, let's say he did do that, but the larger man put a fence around his hut, and let's say he had vines that had thorns on it. So if you try to jump over, you're gonna get hurt. So it's a natural instinct to stay away. So he basically jumped over the thorns,
Okay.
missing that fear, and then just walked in.
Well, here's my thing then. We're talking about savage man who has no permanent shelter up until this point, after I would argue that language was developed and society was developed. Savage man lives outside. Savage man travels through dangerous areas, probably has stepped on a thorn or two. Savage man, has faced dangerous things. Him seeing a fence covered in vines is not really a deterrence. It's just something else he has to get over. He doesn't have the concept yet because it has not been explained to him that you should not go over here because someone put this up. To him, that's just going to look like another obstacle that nature has presented.
Okay, but then there's also fruits and vegetables and everything that if you go and try to touch, go and try to grab, there are thorns that will try to prick you and it hurts. So now
But
he
you're
knows
gonna
that.
need it to survive.
But at what point is the society formed? Not when someone can communicate, hey, that's not yours, you should go in there. Like,
Well, I
but
think
it's
you have to have language before the society could be formed to then develop these boundaries that we're talking about. But it's beyond the physical boundaries. Physical boundaries don't mean anything for savage man when he's literally going through boundaries his entire life until he's developed a language to develop a society that has expected behaviors of these people.
All right, well, that's all the time we have. So now, I guess the best thing to do is put it to you, our viewers, our faithful viewers, and tell us what you think about the debate, who you side with. Post a comment, leave a like. We're not on YouTube. No, we will be on YouTube, so leave a like. And thanks for joining us today.
Mike, you're wrong.
We're still recording.